Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
And good afternoon to everyone. I'm very much looking forward to having this session with you. We don't have much time, so I will try to really concentrate on some of the key points. And really, if you think about it, it's in a sense sort of to give you a stimulus to think about how you lead and how you lead with presence and impact. I don't know if any one of you has recently Googled the word leadership. You probably haven't. You probably have something better to do. But if you do, if you put in the word leading into Google, you get about 1.2 billion hits, which means that in the next 35 minutes we're not going to cover the whole topic, as you might imagine. But I will focus on three key topics. So first of all, we want to look at what is the difference between managing and leading, because I think that's fundamentally important that we understand that difference. We will then look at what do we mean by presence and impact. And then thirdly, very practically, what do you need to do to improve your ability to have more positive impact? So, managing and leading. And I know we probably all have our views on what the difference is. Maybe some of us think it's the same thing. I actually think these two activities, and they both are activities, are very, very different. They are related and interrelated, but very different. Before we move into the what I think the difference is, let's think about what is the purpose of organizations. Think of any kind of organization, be it a club, be it a company, be it a social enterprise, be it a band. Well, I would argue the purpose of value for its stakeholders through coordinated and constructive movement of its resources, which really means that the purpose of organization is achieved through people. Nothing miraculous about that, but I think sometimes we forget that. And sometimes we think of organizations as a machine, as a system, as something engineering. But it really isn't. It is really about people. And it's about how do we engage with each other to achieve something that we all think, including our stakeholders, that we all think is valuable. Now, there are fundamentally two different ways of achieving that. And that's what we call managing and leading. So if you look at managing on the top part there, managing is really a hierarchical task, which is you are able to manage someone who reports to you. You can't manage anyone else. And in that sense, managing means directing and enabling people who report to you to work on their and achieve their specific objectives, which are part of the overall organizational objectives. So managing really is a hierarchical task that limits you to the people who report to you. Now, leading is much, much wider, because as you see there, Mahatma Gandhi, 1930, leading has to do with inspiring other people through your own personal example, for them to engage in something that you exemplify. So leading has to do with creating voluntary followership. In other words, leading has not anything to do with what your job title is, but it has more to do with who you are, what you stand for. And I don't know if any one of you has read that book that is now I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, Rob Goffey from London Business School, asking the question, why should anyone want to be led by you? And I think that's a very, very fundamental question for us to think about. Why should anyone indeed want to be led by you? What have they to gain from you? How can they grow from being with you? What can they learn from you? And when you look at this slide here, managing and leading, I'm not at all saying that it's either or. Very clearly, organizations, in order to achieve their objective and create value, they need to have both. So you need to be able to both engage in managing and in leading at the same time. Now, if you think of your own situation, your own organization, is it 50-50 managing and leading? Is it 80-20? Is it 20-80? Well, clearly that very much depends on your particular situation. You might be in a situation where at this point in time you need more management. In other words, you need to have more hierarchical direction than you might need voluntary followership. Or you might be in a situation where it's exactly the other way around. Now, both of these activities that, as I said, are interdependent, in other words, you need both of them, they happen in today's world. And you might have heard this acronym, VUCA. The world isn't anymore as stable as it might have been decades ago, but it is volatile, which means it changes incredibly rapidly from one moment to another. And you just need to look around the world, the business world, the political world, the social world, everywhere. Changes are incredibly fast and incredibly volatile. It's very, very difficult to predict exactly what will happen next. Therefore, things are uncertain, which means you don't know if you do A, whether B will happen. Therefore, you constantly need to be on the ball. It's like playing chess. You make one move, and the next move happens, and you need to react to that. Thirdly, everything, as we all know, I think, is very, very complex. Everything is connected to everything else. Maybe 100 years ago, whether there was an earthquake in, say, Tokyo, you probably only knew 3 months later. Now, if there would be an earthquake in Tokyo and their stock exchange would be hit, we would see the effect within seconds around the globe. So everything is connected. And lastly, incredibly ambiguous, which means that you don't know whether a particular development in the world is going to be good, is going to be negative, is going to be difficult. So within this context of the world being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, our job is to manage and to lead, which of course, as you will easily understand, is much more difficult than in stable scenarios and stable situations. So let me, and of course today we want to focus on leadership. So the final question really is, in this VUCA world, do we need more management or do we need more leadership? Now you see on this graph, on the vertical side, you see formal authority. Do you have a lot of formal authority or do you have very little? In other words, can you tell a lot of people what they want, what you want them to do? Or maybe you don't have any direct reports at all. And on the horizontal axis, you have outcome certainty, which means how certain is it that if you do A, then B happens? And as I just said, in the VUCA world, very, very often, it's not certain that if you do A, B happens. And so as you can see from this graph here, in the bottom left-hand corner, there's an area which I call maintaining stability. Another word for that would be managing. So you can manage if you have formal authority and if the outcome is relatively certain. In the rest of the graph here, where you have no or little authority, formal authority, and where the outcome is relatively uncertain, that is about leadership. In other words, it is about creating movement, creating followership from people around you who want to take part in what you stand for. And I would argue in a VUCA world, in a world that is very, very unstable and uncertain, we need a lot more active leadership and we need less management. In other words, you cannot manage the chaos that we find ourselves in very often through more rules, but we can lead through it through more courage and more determination. And that's what we want to look at now, to say, well, so what is that? What is leading for positive impact? And I think in a nutshell, in my mind, is leading is a practice, as it says here, of making something happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. So unless you did it, it wouldn't happen. And this is something that should be beneficial to others, not just for yourself. Because why would I follow you if I had the feeling that you were just doing something for yourself? So leading has to do with making something happen that otherwise wouldn't happen, and that makes things better. Now, I think we've all worked long enough in organizations to know that there's a lot of change going on all of the time. But I would argue, and I've seen organizations from the inside for the last 30 years everywhere around the world, any type of organization that you can imagine, from the US Marines to humanitarian organizations to the big industrial companies, very, very often things change, and as a result of that, they're different. But very often they aren't better. So the key thing to think, to keep in mind is that positive impact means making things better for others. So leading has nothing, or leading in a good way if you want, has nothing to do with doing something for yourself. But it's taking the responsibility to make things better for other people. And to conclude this segment, in my mind, there are 4 different types of very specific tasks that are involved in leading to make things better for other people. The first one is that you need to have the ability to see something that is not there yet, but could be. If you look at the sailboat, this is one of the America's Cup sailboats. I don't know whether you can call them sailboats anymore. They're more like planes. These ships are only there because there were some people in the world who said we could do something like this. These things could go 100 kilometers an hour if we designed them like that. And not everyone has that ability to see something that isn't there yet. And it doesn't have to be a big thing such as this. It could be an ordinary meeting that doesn't work very well, in which what really needs to be addressed isn't addressed. It could be you simply seeing, hey, this meeting could be better, and therefore I'll do something about this. Which means the second step is that you decide courageously what should be better and doing something about it. As you know, it's always easy to sit there and think other people should do something better. But do we have the courage to do something about it? Which means, how much can we role model what we want to see better in organizations? It's easy to say to other people or to write emails that say we should be more innovative, we should be more courageous, we should be this or that. But actually starting it. So ask yourself the question the next time you're about to send an email to some other person, or when you speak to your management team, when you say we should be more creative, more risk-taking, more innovative. Well, how would it be if you started that, like Gandhi, if you were the role model for the change? And only then enrolled other people, connected with other people to create momentum. So if you look at those 4 tasks, those are, in my mind, the 4 very tangible activities that you need to be good at in order to lead well. But clearly, there's one other key aspect which we want to come to now, which is called presence and impact. Now, let me start by saying something that is very obvious, but we often forget it, which is whatever we do, whatever you say, whatever you write, what you don't write, what you wear, to whom you speak, to whom you don't speak, everything you do or don't do will have an impact on the people around you. They'll talk about you, and they'll make some sense out of what they see you do or don't do. Now, the fundamental truth in my mind is that you have to be present in order to achieve the positive impact you want to have. Now, I'll say this again because I think it's very, very important. You always have an impact, but in order to have the impact you want to have, you need to be present. Now, there's a lot of esoteric literature and a lot of talk on the web and everywhere about being present. Another way to say that might be to say to be here now. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means simply to focus on three aspects at any given time. So to be constantly aware in any situation of yourself, what goes on, what emotions are going on within you, what are you thinking, what's your intention. Secondly, being constantly aware of the other people that you're interacting with, be they in the room with you, sitting around a conference table, or now, sitting remotely and listening to me in this case. Be it that you are about to send an email to other people, you're talking to your clients, whatever it might be, but your understanding of what goes on with them. What might their intentions be, what might their interests be, what might their emotions be, and so on. And thirdly, at any given moment, the situation that you find yourself in with the other people, be they your clients or your co-workers or bosses or whoever they might be. So there are really three aspects to being present at any moment in time. To be present of yourself, present of other people, and your situation. And only then, just like Djokovic here, the tennis player, only if you are aware of these three things, you can hit the ball well. In other words, you can address the situation that you find yourself in fully and appropriately. Now, can we do that at any moment in time? Can we always be conscious of ourselves, of others, and what goes on around us? What do you think? I guess the answer is obvious. No, you can't. Because there's too much going on, really, at any moment in time. Imagine all of the hundreds and thousands of stimuli at any moment that happen to us. Now, we can develop presence because presence is an ability of the brain. And there are two parts to that ability. There is the automatic system. That's what Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, which I can highly recommend, which Daniel Kahneman calls the automatic system. That's the part of our brain that works subconsciously all of the time. When you walk down the street, when you walk down the office, when you read something, when you go shopping, you read something online. That is the ability of the brain to do all kinds of things at the same time. As you see that lady there, she's drinking something, she's eating something. I hope she's not driving, but it looks like she is. So can we do many things at the same time, something that we call multitasking? Yes, we can. Of course we can. And we wouldn't be functioning if we couldn't do that. It's a fundamental ability that we need to have. And at the same time, we do need to have the ability to concentrate on something. So it's like the letter T. And that's something Daniel Kahneman calls the effortful system. In other words, you need to be able to concentrate consciously on something. And as you might imagine, we need to be able to do both. We need to be able to work with our automatic system and go through the world managing and well and quickly, and we need to be able to know when to stop and say, I really need to concentrate on this. Now, how does this happen? Does this happen automatically? Well, the automatic system happens automatically, but the effortful system, the ability to concentrate, is part of a trained ability. It doesn't happen automatically. It is something we can train and we need to train for. Now, how would we train that? How would we train our ability to concentrate? Well, this is a slightly weird picture of a golf swing, but on purpose. Because we train our effortful system by all kinds of activities that have to do with doing one thing at any one time. Be that you consciously think, be that you go jogging or walking or reflecting or meditating or writing or golfing or anything. In other words, this is an ability that we all can train if we focus on it. And that is the fundamental building block, if you want, of having impact. Because, as I said before, if we're not conscious of ourselves, other people, and what goes on in any given situation, we cannot address it properly. So I would really encourage you to develop a practice in which you develop your ability to concentrate. And in our world these days, where we get hundreds of emails and calls and all kinds of things, it's very, very difficult. So a little tip, I would invest 10 minutes every morning, probably easiest, and sit and do nothing other than just think, or write, or go for a walk. Now, how do we have a positive impact? The ability to concentrate and be present. As I said, that's the fundamental background of this. If you can't do that, if you're not present, then you can't have the impact you want. So how do you have the positive impact that you want? Well, first, fully become yourself. It's no good trying to become like Bill Gates or Albert Einstein or Bob Dylan or anyone else. You really need to use yourself. If leading has to do with being a positive role model, then you need to fully use yourself rather than trying to lead like someone else. You need to make sure that over time you develop your own leadership style, your own stance in the world, because only that way you can become the leader that you could possibly be. Secondly, you really need to 5 shifts, which I will explain in a moment. In other words, if you want something different to happen than what has happened so far, you need to do something differently. I think Albert Einstein was the one saying insanity, it's a sign of insanity to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So in other words, if you wanted to have a more positive, more powerful impact, you most probably would have to do a number of things differently. Now, here's what I think we all need to do differently. And as I said, there are 5 shifts. Here's the first one. If you really wanted to have a much bigger, more positive impact than the one that you usually have, we need to switch more from what I call, or shift more from what I call from demanding to inspiring. In other words, rather than telling other people what they should do, inspiring them through your own behavior. You see here Mr. Daniel Barenboim on this picture, who is one of the best and most well-known and most famous conductors in the world. And you see him here with the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, whom you might have heard of. They're young musicians from many countries in the Middle East. And over the last 15 or so years, he's really inspired them to become one of the best philharmonic orchestras in the world. So really you need to think about and, well, maybe feel into is a better way of thinking about it. What is it that you are passionate about? As Peter Drucker says here, you need to take charge of your own energy. If you don't feel energetic and passionate about something, there's no way that you can lead anything. You might manage something which might be really passionate about something that makes sense to other people as well. You won't have any chance to create any movement, and therefore you have very little chance to create a bigger impact than you are. So, first question for you to think about, what is it that you really, really passionate about in your work that you would want to create movement around? The second shift, reacting to proacting. And these are maybe slightly strange words here when I say from reacting because of to acting in order to. Look at the tennis player on the left-hand side who's breaking his racket. He's probably angry and frustrated, and he's reacting because something happened just a minute ago. Think of Rafael Nadal on the right-hand side there. He is acting in order to deliver a particular type of serve. So the fundamental shift that we all need to think about is that rather than us being driven by the past, by your habits, by your emotions, by something that happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago, you shift to acting in order to create a better future, which means you really need to be mindful in any given moment, or certainly in the important ones, to say, okay, so my client might have just said something which really upset me. But rather than reacting on your upsetness, ask yourself the question, what relationship do you want to create with that particular client or with that particular person in the future? And possibly that then means, despite being angry, in order to create a better future with that particular person, you might need to do something different than reacting to the anger. Now, as I said before, is that always possible? No, of course not. I mean, there are too many things that happen that we react to. But it is important, and it is possible in important situations. But clearly, as I said before, in order to know, is this such a situation, you need to be present. So, the second shift is from reacting to proacting. That leads me to the third shift, which experience. I find these days people work longer and longer hours, have more emails and more phone calls, have more demands. And that often seems to feel like working in a hamster wheel, like the gentleman on the left-hand side there. And this constant focus on doing something. I bet you've been invited to meetings and the invitation said, we will discuss this or that, or we will do this or the other. Rather than saying, in this meeting, we want to produce a decision, or we want to produce a deeper understanding, or whatever the outcome might be. In other words, the fundamental shift in order to have a more positive impact is to switch your focus from what you are doing to what you want to have come out of a particular activity. So rather than thinking, I need to talk to this particular person, to think about, so what do I want to achieve through the talking? Well, at the end of the conversation, I want the person to be more empowered, to be more inspired, to be more engaged. So this really, as Stephen Covey used to say, start with the end in mind. What do you want to achieve in any encounter, in any conversation, through any email, through anything you do? Ask yourself that, and that'll tell you what you have to do in order to get there. rather than being stuck in doing things. Now, I'm not saying in order to achieve a given outcome you don't need to do anything, but it helps greatly to understand what is the outcome I want to produce and then think about what do I need to do for that, rather than being stuck in this hamster wheel or the doing loop, as I sometimes call it. Let's move on to the fourth shift. This has very much to do with your power. Now you see the white writing there talks about the aspects of what I call your position power. So anything that enables you to achieve results because of a certain position that you have. And to walk us through very briefly, clearly position power has to do with your right to issue orders and take decisions. So if you're the vice president of marketing or the CEO of your particular company or the, whatever it might be, that job comes with a number of decisions that you can take. It comes with a number of responsibilities. So you can do certain things based on that position. Number two and number three have to do with that as well. You have certain control over pay, over promotion, over disciplining, over resources if you have a certain position. Now number four is a slightly strange one. I call it halo power, but it has to do with your position. It has to do with your boss's position, because that is the perception of other people of your boss. So if people think you report to someone who is really powerful in the organization, by definition, they will give you more power. In other words, they will listen more to your words. If they think you report to someone who is a loser in the organization, whatever you say will have less impact, because people say, well, he reports or she reports to that guy who's a loser, so you can forget him or her. So you see the first top four have to do with your position. Now, in order to have more positive impact, you need to shift to the bottom four, the informal power, which have to do with you. What legitimate access to information do you have? What do you know? What expertise do you have? To whom are you connected? And how present are you? And these four, the last four, number 5, 6, 7, and 8, they are all under your control. These you can develop. You can make them bigger. The first four are given to you by the organization, but the second four you can develop for yourself. And the more you use them, the more you develop them, the more positive impact or the bigger chance will there be for you to have a bigger positive impact. So think about shifting or adding to your position power by developing your personal power or the aspects of your personal power more. Now, and finally, the last shift, and I've chosen a picture of Steve Jobs here because I do think of the late Steve Jobs, because I do think that he lived according to this principle very admirably. And I'm calling this shift from cautious to courageous. And that has to do with two questions really. The first one is a fundamental one, which is your leadership aspiration. What is it that you want to create in the world, in your organization, in your team, in your family, in your community that isn't there yet? In other words, what do you stand for and want to see more of in your team, your organization, your life, or the world? What do you want to create? Now, as I said earlier, not all of us see that. It's a deeply creative act to see something that isn't there yet that could be. So that is the first fundamental question. And it might very well be that you say, actually, I don't know, I don't see anything that I want to create. I want to do a good management job, I want to have a career. That's all fine. But you need to be clear when you make that choice, that you won't be able to create much voluntary followership, because if you don't stand for something that is bigger than yourself, then there's very little reason for other people to voluntarily join you. And the second question, and leading on from your leadership aspiration, has to do with your leadership practices. What is it, very concretely and very specifically, that you do? And there are really two questions here, as you can see. What practices do you need to excel in to achieve your aspiration? What do you really need to be excellent in your leadership practice? And how will you go about developing that expertise and that excellence? As you know, watching a video about, I don't know, about surfing or skiing is not going to make us better in skiing. The same with leadership. Listening to me or reading a book is not going to help you to get better at leadership. All it does, and something that I hope I'm able to do today, is to inspire you a little bit to say, actually, I really, really, really care about this or that. And in order to do that, I need to be good at that. The last question, of course, is how will I go about becoming good at that particular practice, or those particular practices that I really need to be good at. And they might be very, in inverted comma, very simple ones that talk about how do you listen to people, how do you help them to understand complex things, how do you motivate people, how do you deal with difficult situations. That really is, these really are the tools of leading, if you will. Now, we're coming to the end of my little talk. But before I hand it back to Mr. Joffrey to open for questions, I want to leave you with one thought. In my mind, leading powerfully with presence and impact is something that Michael Jordan, the basketball player, knew a lot about, because I think you will agree with me that in his career he was very, very, very impactful. And he always said this. He said, it's not about the shoes, it's what you do in them. And that, to me, is the elemental truth of all of this. This is not about your job title. This is not about your job. This is not about the suit you're wearing. This is really what you do in any given situation. It's what you do with the job you have that goes beyond the job, that is bigger than the job, that has to do with you doing something that otherwise wouldn't happen, and that's beneficial to a wide range of stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'll hand over to Mr. Joffrey to see if there are any questions that I might be able to answer.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hartmut. Folks, we are now open for the question and answers. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on Webinar Console on the right side of your screen. You can click on it, and I shall give you an opportunity to speak to the doctor. Or you could put your questions in the question box, and I'll be happy to read them over on your behalf. So let me go to the question box. We already have a question posted by Brother Mahsen Lodi. The question is, how can we overcome VUCA? Is there any framework to deal with it?
Well, that's a very, very good question. The answer is no. We can't overcome VUCA. It's a bit like saying, can we overcome gravity? I mean, VUCA is just what the world is right now. I think what we can do is we can improve our ability to manage and lead and live in a VUCA world. I mean, if you think of VUCA as a whirlwind, as a hurricane, you know, everything moves around you. In my mind, there are a number of things that we can do that all have to do with us being relatively clear what we stand for. You know, to be very clear about our roots. What do we value? And then secondly, it has to do with the direction that we want to lead in. So in other words, stability does not come from the world these days. Stability needs to come more from us. And the more clear you are about what are your roots, what do you stand for, what are your principles, and then the future direction, what do you want to lead in, what direction you want to lead in. I think that's where stability comes from. And then lastly, stability also can come from how well, how deeply, how robustly you're connected to other people. Because if we find ourselves alone in a hurricane, that's very, very difficult. But if we're solidly connected to people around, your team, around the organization, around the world, we can be more stable and therefore more powerful. But we can't do anything to change VUCA, I think.
Well, thank you. We have another question from Mr. Mark Stora. The question is, I find it very hard to do the doing part. Is there anything that can be done?
Yes, that is a very, very good question. I think we all have that problem, don't we? Because I was working with a group of senior executives last week, and a lot of them were saying, I get 400 emails a day. We're just looking at them, just reading the regarding line is going to take 15 seconds. So I think it's a fundamental challenge that we all have to, how do we get out of the hamster wheel, and how do we focus more on what are we actually trying to do, what are we actually trying to achieve here. There's interesting research by a London Business School and the late Sumantra Ghoshal, who's interviewed and observed tens of thousands of senior executives, and the depressing finding is that only about 10% of them have high focus and high energy. In other words, are able to focus on the few key issues and have enough energy to see them through to their completion. 40%, and I think this is the key issue of the question here, 40% of people have high energy but very, very little focus. In other words, they run around having endless energy, work 16 hours a day, touch everything that shines and blinks and say to the people, we need to do this, and we need to do that, and we need to start this, and how about this, and how about that. But they have very, very little focus. So in other words, I think the only way to get out of the hamster wheel, because we can't stop the world, as I said earlier. You're not going to be able to stop the 400 emails that you're getting and all of the requests from corporate and from your bosses and from your customers. I think the only way out of it are two things. One of it has to do with to really be clear what are the core priorities here in the longer term. So I think we need to begin to focus rather than on today and the next 5 minutes. We need to have a view on what are we trying to build, what are we trying to create in the longer term, in the end of next year and the end of the next 24 months. So I think that's the first question, to really think about what are the core priorities here. Secondly, and I know it's a difficult thing to do, but the ability to say no to things. Because I think without prioritizing it, saying this is what I will focus on, and these key things or these non-key things I won't do, we won't get out of the hamster wheel. And thirdly, I think the shift that I was talking about earlier, which to at any moment in time to think in terms of outcomes. So imagine you pick up the phone later on to call a client, rather than thinking, I need to speak about this or that. I need to speak about pricing, let's say, or whatever it might be. To think in terms of, so what do I want to achieve at the end of the 15 minutes? What I want to achieve, for example, might be an agreement from the client about this. So shifting from understanding what I want to get out of this meeting, out of this conversation, out of this phone call or email. Last tip might be to think about 4 categories. Think about interacting when you interact with other people, be it in a meeting or in an email. Think about what do I want them to understand at the end of it? What do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? and or what do I want them to do as a result of what I've just said or sent. So think more in terms of outcomes and focus more on the key things. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. There's another interesting one. There's one aspect to move towards automatic system for multitasking, but there's another aspect to do it quick and fast if you want to compete in today's world. While doing this, how much the world is compromising on the quality of deliverables in general?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because clearly we need to be able to do both. We need to automate things in order for them to do them quickly and efficiently, and at the same time, and that's the point here, it's called a paradox, and at the same time we need to be able to concentrate on important questions. I give you hopefully a simple example. I mean, can you automate a group of executives thinking about their company's 5 or 10 year strategy? Is that something that should be done quickly and almost automatically? No. But if you're a bank and you have 500 branches around the world, to open the 500 first, well, maybe that you can automate by having a process to select properties, by knowing exactly how the branch should look like. Or in manufacturing processes, of course, General Motors doesn't, for every new car they put together in any given hour, they don't redesign the process. So for those kinds of processes, of course, we need to be fast, we need to be automatic, and we need to almost be subconscious. It's about like riding the bicycle. You couldn't really think about all of the moves that you make because you would fall off. Or driving a car. Imagine you would think every second about what you're doing right now. But at the same time, imagine you sit with your management team and you talk about the vision or the strategy of your company, or how your industry will develop in the next 10, 15 years. That cannot be an automatic process, because then you would just tell each other what you already think, and you would come up with old answers when in fact you need to develop new answers. I'm working currently a lot with the publishing industry, newspapers and magazines, big publishing houses. And if you think about what impact the digital world will have on them, that's not something they can decide in 5 minutes. It's something they really need to think about and work on. What does it mean for them? So in summary, we need to be able to do both, automatic and fast, and deep and deliberate. The key is to understand when to work in which mode.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, sir. In pretext of VUCA, do you think slowing down might be an advantage for some? As we read that Volvo introduced the culture of slow. That is no idea in the organization is being implemented before 2 years till it is completely optimized.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, I work a lot with management teams and leadership teams and boards, and I often say to them, in order to go fast, you need to go slow first. So in other words, and again, this talks about the automatic and the deliberate, and it talks about what are we doing now versus what are we doing in the future. So very clearly, imagine a team of people having an important, either strategic, long-term, or difficult issue to deal with, difficult question to answer. I always make the difference between thinking together and exchanging thoughts. Now, exchanging thoughts means maybe, imagine we sit in a building and the building burns. Will we very slowly and deliberately think about what to do? No, we would very quickly exchange thoughts. You might say, oh, I think the emergency exit is on the left. I say, yes, I agree, or no, I've seen it on the right, and off we go. But if we talk about how do we need to position our company in 10 years, in 5 years, in 15 years, we need to develop new thinking, which means we need to think together rather than telling us what we already know. And thinking together takes time, and it's a very slow and very deliberate process. And that, in my mind, has to do with what I said before. You need to know when is the moment when you need to go slow. And then secondly, it has to do with the ability to concentrate over an extended period of time on something. And if you think about our kids and ourselves these days, we're so good with all of the automatic multitasking stuff. You just look at your computer, you have 15 screens open at the same time that flash. So we're very, very good at that because we do it a lot. We train it a lot. But when do we ever train to really go slow and concentrate? So I absolutely agree. Going fast and going slow are both needed, and going slow really requires us to develop these sorts of abilities I've talked about before. Any other questions?
Okay, we have one last question from Mr. Anwar Karimov. The question is, dear doctor, could you provide some more tips how to motivate ourselves for the shift?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. How do we motivate ourselves for those shifts? It's easy to say, it's difficult to do. Because what it is, in my mind, it really is about asking yourself, what are you really, really, really passionate about in your work? What do you want to create that's not there yet and that you think should be? And then the second, often more difficult, or at least equally difficult question is, and what price are you willing to pay for that? And by price, I don't mean money, but I mean, if you are the one standing up, imagine in a management meeting, everyone says one thing and you standing up, maybe not literally, but you speaking up and saying, actually guys, I disagree, I think we need to be doing something else. Very clearly you will only do that if you feel passionate about what you're about to say. Because, disagreeing with people, potentially disagreeing with your boss, requires quite a bit of courage. And unless you really, really want to make something happen that is not there yet, it's not worthwhile. I mean, you might say you want to run the, the London Marathon next year in 4 hours. Getting up every morning for a year to go training, that is quite a price to pay. And so you will only do that if you really care enough, out of whatever reason. You really care enough about the outcome, which is running the London Marathon in 4 hours. So it really starts with you being very clear about what are you deeply caring about in your work and in your life.
Hey, Doctor, just last quick question. What was from Brother Lodi? What was the university name this study was done?
Which study are we talking about? Are we talking about the energy focus, the energy and focus that I was talking about?
Yeah, perhaps the same one. Could you name the university where the study was done?
Yeah, it's London Business School, and it's Professor Sumantra Ghoshal.
London Business School.
He died a few years ago, but if you Google that, you'll find that. It's called the Energy Focus Matrix.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor, for a very, very interesting presentation. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we all dismiss out?
Well, the only thing I want to say is, or want to conclude, is what I said earlier with Michael Jordan. It really is about not the job you have. Leading with impact really is about looking at you. And the question in my mind is, how can you become fully you? Rather than saying, I want to be like so-and-so, how do you become fully you? That really is the fundamental question in my mind. I'd like to thank all of you for your attention and for your presence. and I wish you good luck in having powerful and positive impacts in the future. Thank you.
Well, once again, thank you very much, Dr. Hartmut Stulten, for your very, very interesting presentation. I would like to thank you especially on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE. Thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording this, which will be uploaded on
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.